Arsenal's depth is absolutely ridiculous. I have to say that now. Their depth is ridiculous. 6 changes from the Newcastle team and still a massively dominant performance. Now, I'll start off the bat because I know it will trigger certain people if you don't say it. Yes, the game got nervy towards the end. The simple reason, the only element of tonight's game I'm criticising when it comes to Arsenal is the lack of clinical edge in that final third. Gyökeres, I think, should have scored a goal in the first half. Trossard in the second half should be scoring 2 minutes in, 3 minutes into the restart. About the 55th, 60th minute, should be making it 2-0. They just kept Olympiacos in the game. That's the only element I would criticise tonight. It's the only element that I think Mikel Arteta will be drumming into his players is kill these games off. But there is a gargantuan, a Kim Kardashian-esque peak Jennifer Lopez butt that we've got to talk about here. 6 changes. 6 changes. And still young starlets like Dalman and Waneri not getting onto the pitch. And Arsenal were able to dominate and be so superior in nearly every single portion of that game. That squad depth is ridiculous now. I looked at the bench. Last season, if Arsenal made 6 changes and had a brand new signing in Henke and their main striker, one of their main strikers last season injured in Kai Havertz, and I might be forgetting about somebody, that bench might have looked strong, but the starting lineup would have been very, very weak indeed. And it wasn't tonight. And there's a player I want to start off by talking about this evening, and it was Martin Odegaard. Gets a lot of criticism, and sometimes I think it has been absolutely thoroughly deserved. Sometimes he's been very poor in games. Now, when you look at a lot of the team sheets tonight, they'll show Arsenal playing their 4-3-3. But if you actually watch what Arsenal were doing, is Zubimendi and Moreno were sitting in the 2, and for large parts of the game, Odegaard was central. Doesn't mean he didn't drift. It doesn't mean he didn't touch the ball in other areas. But Odegaard tonight was dropping not so deep as he normally does. He was still shifting more to the right-hand side in the first half and quite a bit to the left-hand side in the second half. But it was very central. So it was more of a 4-2-3-1 than it was a 4-3-3 for me. And Odegaard was just out of this world. He was picking that ball up, and some of his passing tonight, whether it was to get a move going or whether it was to put players in, it was out of this world. It was a clinic. It was a masterclass, and had the finishing of the Trossards, the Gyökereses tonight been on point, the man could have walked away with 2 assists minimum. 2 assists minimum from today's game. I know he got one at the end. Probably one of his more simplistic and simple passes of the night. But I thought Odegaard tonight was brilliant. And there's something that's generating this. It won a slight tweak to the system, a slight adjustment. All right, guys, I don't want you being so far out on the right tonight, Odegaard, where you're linking up with Martinelli the whole time. I want you to be in the middle. I want you to drift left. I want you to drift right. But only right and left to centre. And I want you to pick that ball up, 1 touch or 2, and I want you to whip that ball out to whichever flank is now open. So it was almost, Arsenal play a lot of the horseshoe shape and they go side to side, which, by the way, is very typical in football. But what they did tonight is they sped that process up. It would get to Odegaard, and rather than it going into Odegaard, and Odegaard says, right, okay, there you go, Martinelli, Gyökeres, back to Odegaard, back to Zubimendi, back to Odegaard, and then a switch. It was into Odegaard, he'd drop a shoulder, and bang, straight out to Miles Lewis-Skelly, straight out to Moreno, straight out to Trossard, and Olympiacos couldn't handle it. And I would say the only element tonight, when you look at the stats, it will say 16 shots to 10, and you'll think, oh, close game. It wasn't. If we're being absolutely honest, Olympiacos had a couple of moments where they looked a little dangerous. And there was a couple of good saves made by Raya. One first half, one header near the end of the game, which I thought was going wide anyway, but it needed to be touched. Arsenal's biggest problem was that final ball or the finishing touch. So I wonder what that noise was. Don't know what that noise is. Somebody must be doing something in my house. I didn't know what that noise was. I thought, what's that noise? I thought it was the fan on my PlayStation came on. I was like, well, how can it? It's not even plugged in. No electric. Anyway, they sped that process up. The issue that they had is that it was just that final ball. And I felt like Trossard tonight, it was almost like he was playing for Olympiacos. And it's surprising because he can be quite clinical. But it was whether it was a final ball being overhit. There was one moment in the second half where the ball gets played out. Great play by Arsenal. And this happened on a number of occasions. Great play. The ball ends up out wide. The ball's dinked. All it needs is a nice dink ball to that back, either centrally for Gyökeres or to the back post for Martinelli, and it's overhit. So you won't see Arsenal with lots of shots today. And that's the area to criticise. That final ball or the conversion rate being too low with some of the really good chances they had. But don't let anybody fool you into thinking that Arsenal were not the better team. And had that second goal they scored by Saka have come in the 35th minute, had it have come in the 50th minute, and they'd have managed the game out, those nerves wouldn't have come with 2 goals, by the way. Nobody would be talking about anything. It's right to criticise the lack of clinical edge, but overall, Arsenal tonight were brilliant. And as I've already stated, bringing on Mosquera when there was there's an injury for Gabriel, let's see how bad it is, but being able to bring him on, being able to start someone as good as Ben White and then bring on Timber, being able to bring on a Declan Rice, bring on an Eze, bring on a Saka, and maybe if the guys were more clinical, some of these players wouldn't have come on, so maybe Arteta would have preferred that. Maybe he wanted to give some of the kids a run out. But that's Champions League football for you. And Olympiacos, they don't have a great away record. I don't think they've won 1 in 10. But let's not pretend that every player out there on the pitch for Olympiacos is an absolute bum, hasn't played at the high. I mean, they're playing at the highest level, but hasn't played at higher levels. And when it stays at 1-0, there's always that danger in the Champions League of something going wrong. But Arsenal, again, I thought showed good mental strength as well tonight. They were able to essentially not allow, because you could feel the nerves in the crowd, and I'm watching it through here, and I messaged Goldbridge actually during the game, and I was like, do you think Arsenal are going to fuck this? Because it did have that feel, and it's happened a couple of times in the last few years to Arsenal, Premier League and Champions League, when at the Emirates, when the crowd gets nervy, when the noise drops, when the whistling starts, sometimes their team crumbles. And I've always felt this about this Arsenal side. They do better when the support's up. And I get it's a bit of a, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. They need their players to be performing for them to be up as well. But I thought the players did really well to see it out, because this could have ended up being what Man City have gone through. Now they're away from home, so a little different. But where you're the best team, you're a goal up, you should be seeing the game out, but then you walk away with 1 point and not 3. And you want to be in the top 8 of this Champions League group stage. You want to be in the top 8, and more importantly, you want to try and be up near the top like Arsenal were last year, because you want those second legs at the Emirates Stadium, at Anfield, at the Camp Nou, whichever team you are. And also when you're playing some of the quote-unquote lesser teams, easier teams early, you need to get those 3 points. Because when you look at the run, for instance, with Man City, obviously they won their first game, unless I'm absolutely mistaken. But you kind of look at Monaco and think that's the game they probably should be, they should be winning. Yeah, they did win their first one against Napoli. But then they go away to Villarreal, then they play Dortmund, then they play Leverkusen, then they're away to Madrid. And you start looking at the next block of games and they move up a level. And you're okay, well, you slip up in a couple of them and maybe you've got to play those extra 2 games later in the season. We had no idea last year the way the league phase was going to work. We now do. Every goal, every point is so important, because it potentially makes the draw later on down the line easier for you. And it's the first time really in Champions League history they've done this. And I've always felt they should. Like the best few teams in the league phase will play the second leg at home. I always think there's an advantage with that by and large. If imagine Arsenal were taking the 1 goal deficit, was it 2 goals? 1 or 2 goals. Imagine they were taking that deficit against PSG to the Emirates. Could it have been a different game as an example? Potentially, it could have been. Maybe not, but potentially it could have been different. Would Liverpool, if Liverpool got beat 3-0, 4-0 at Anfield by Barcelona, would they have been able to go to the Camp Nou and pull off that comeback? Probably not. So when Barcelona came back from being far, I reckon if you went and weighed it up, most teams, I'd love to see the percentage of teams that are home second leg versus the teams away in the second leg. And you've got to compare like for like teams. You can't be comparing, I'm not talking about, it's a slight advantage, but if Bodo Glimt get to the knockout stages and they're home in the second leg against Real Madrid, it's a slight leveler, but it isn't. When you're talking about the big teams playing each other, I'd love to see the percentage of the home team in the second leg qualification rate versus the other way around. I'd love to see the numbers on that. I'd love to see the numbers. I bet it's at least 60%, if not higher, in favour of the home team in the second leg. So I think you should be fighting for it. And Arsenal have had a great start. It's 2 wins from 2 clean sheets, some nervy moments they had to get through tonight. And as I've already stated, the only real feedback I'd give Arsenal tonight that was I would think Arsenal fans would be disappointed with, Aloni like me, would be disappointed. I know that would trigger the right people. That's why I said it. I'm very sorry. The only thing I'd really push back on and say needs to be better, that final ball at times and that finishing touch, because Trossard mainly should have put them a couple of goals ahead, and it could have been an absolute runaway score in the end. But Odegaard, fantastic. And I'll repeat it again. The squad depth for Arsenal is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Hit that like button, please. Make sure you are subscribing to the channel. Get that done now.